You tend to think that Wendi was pulling the strings, sort of manipulating it through this damsel in distress character that she plays. Am I right?
Yes. I don't see she was the only one, but she certainly, maybe not consciously, but understood the family dynamics.
So, Dr. Linda, what do you think of that? The fact that Wendi was sort of the manipulator in charge here.
Look, I think there's definitely something to that. And I think that, again, if we look at the family dynamic, when we love our family members, we run and to support them. I think Carm raises an interesting point.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we're all just trying to survive in a rough world.
So, Carm, you were at a beautiful little recital for my daughter today. It was nice to see you there. Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it tremendously.
I had an amazing, I don't want to say an epiphany. It was definitely not an epiphany, but I had a transcendent moment, I guess, during that. Typically on a given day, I'm already worried about something. But this morning, instead of being worried about, let's say, money right off the bat, I was actually wondering what to worry about today. So I've been boxing, and I have a trainer who's a number 4 heavyweight in the world, and he told me positive thoughts, positive reality, negative thoughts, negative reality. You can't pay a therapist what a number 4 former heavyweight champ of the world can tell you in the boxing ring. And he basically told me to stop being a you-know-what and told me to man up, told me to meditate, and I've been meditating, and then I caught myself wondering about what to worry about, and I caught the thought like you would in meditation. Anyway, I can tell that I've bored you, so I'm definitely boring the audience. I just wanted to share
Very boring.
that.
Do you want to help my son? His company, Content Partners Media, specializes in brand video and content creation for innovative companies and others. Please go to www.contentpartnersmedia.com and hire him. I repeat, please go to www.contentpartnersmedia.com.
On to the Dan Markel murder case. And today we've got something, Carm, that I know you are going to be riveted by, because unlike shows past where we've had all this legal talk and attorneys and legal speculation, today we bring in a psychologist, Carm. This is right in your wheelhouse, correct?
No, I am like much lower on the totem pole.
But you are a licensed therapist. And today we have Dr. Linda Papadopoulos. Dr. Linda, how are you?
I'm great. It's lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you. I'm going to tell the audience a little bit about you, and then we'll get cracking here. So Dr. Linda is one of the best-known and well-respected psychologists working in the UK today. That you heard me right, in the United Kingdom, not here in America, but the UK. She, by the way, hails from Toronto, Canada, which happens to be where the Markels are from and where the Sherman murder occurred, which is what we're focusing on as well. Dr. Linda is the founder and director of the successful program in counseling psychology at the London Metropolitan University. She was appointed Reader in Psychology in 2001. That is a British title for sure, a great distinction at such a young age. In 2010, she was commissioned by the Home Office, sort of like the Secretary of State, to write a review on the effects of sexualization on young people. She's appeared on every show imaginable. She was a psychotherapist for 3 seasons of VH1's reality show, Celebrity Fit Club. She also hosted the Discovery Fit and Health Channel TV series, My Naked Secret. She's been a regular commentator on so many true life crime and history programs, now including Surviving the Survivor. She's also a prolific author, including the book, What Men Say, What Women Hear. Interesting, Carm. What Men Say, What Women Hear. Mirror, Mirror, Dr. Linda's Body Image Revolution, and Becoming a Therapist, a manual for personal and professional development. I'm excited about this, Carm. Before we get going right now, real quick, if you want to get our newsletter, you just drop your comments into the YouTube comments section. You can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and we are building up that Patreon page. And I'm going to offer up Carm on that Patreon page. And I know you all want a piece
Free
of Carm.
charge.
Carm, we'll discuss that off air. Nothing is free in this world. Linda, you are from Toronto, like the Markels. You are a civilized people, unlike us Americans. I know you're across the pond. This has actually garnered quite a bit of attention. Have you followed the case closely, or is it something that you're focused on, more when people like myself reach out, or is it something that is of personal interest to you?
Our mutual friend, Steve Cohen, actually was speaking to me about this case. I think what really caught my kind of attention from it more than anything was this notion that I think is implied in a lot of true crime cases, a lot of sort of the documentaries I've worked on, kind of taken a look at. We hear this word sort of narcissism being thrown around, but to me, what really caught my eye is almost this sort of collective narcissism of a family, not necessarily just of an individual, that kind of allowed this to happen. In many ways, it was sort of a perfect storm. And I think because of that, I've been following it. Has it gained sort of a lot of attention over here in the UK? Not really, but I think it's one of those cases that when you begin to look at it, really is fascinating.
And how do you, different words get thrown around. Obviously, narcissist is one, sociopath is another. So how do you distinguish between a sociopathy and a narcissistic personality?
A narcissistic personality disorder is a personality disorder. It's a personality type. When we speak about antisocial personality disorder, that's more to do with sociopathy, right? So that's more a mental disorder, which is someone who will consistently show no regard for right or wrong, ignore people's feelings, really kind of lack the empathy towards, what someone else is experiencing. We often find that, again, with antisocial personality traits, things like sociopathy, we've got violent traits. You see a lot of egocentrism, which is where you kind of, again, people kind of think about the narcissism there. And the other thing that you often see is a disregard for sort of social norms. So there is a difference. I think one of the things that's interesting with narcissism is that people tend to think it's just about the fact that if I'm narcissistic, I have a heightened sense of ego of who I am. I also underestimate everyone else around me, though. And I think that's often the very interesting thing. It's not just that I think I'm smart. I think that everyone else is dumb.
I believe you were able to see some of Wendi's interrogation. And if not, I know you heard about it. She was interrogated just a few days after, I believe it was 4 days after Dan was found murdered in his driveway. Actually, I believe it was later that day. I apologize.
Yeah, that's
that
right.
same day, correct. And a lot going on today, Carmen. A lot swirling around here behind the scenes. So she was interrogated after her husband's death. What did you make of that interrogation? As a psychologist, did it sway you one way or the other in terms of guilt or innocence?
I think when you look at it, it seems to a large extent very kind of believable, right? So I know there's a lot of stuff that's come out since, but a lot of the reactions did seem very organic, right? So at least on first sight, I have to say the first time I saw it, I didn't seem to see any big red flags from where I was. I don't know if either of you felt differently.
Carm, did you feel differently at all when you watched Wendi's interrogation? I know you've watched it.
No, but I was thinking of something else. Can I tell you?
Yes, you sure can, Carm.
I think that there was a lot of ethnic stuff in it. She's a bright woman. She's an educated
When you
woman.
say ethnic, you're being euphemistic. You mean something related to being Jewish?
Yes.
So
yes.
Elaborate. What do you mean?
That, she would start to say something and then she would think of the implications of that out there and then sort of even report on that this may seem like blah, 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 and analyzing her own, watching herself testify. I don't know if you picked that up.
That's interesting. So you're saying there was this sense that she was almost doing that self-awareness. She was hyper self-aware. So she was kind of standing outside of herself and imagining what she sounded like to others.
Yes.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Definitely the mind of a therapist at work there. So you felt like it was kind of like an outer body experience. She was watching herself.
She's bright and she knows.
And she's more than bright. She's an attorney.
No, but she's bright.
Yes, and an attorney.
And she not only is emoting, then she kind of steps out of that, and then she imagines what the world sees here right now.
So she was...
I mean, I'm paranoid, by the way. Hi, how are you?
By the way, I mean, another way of saying that is she's calculating or calculated. And Dr. Linda, I mean, first of all, how would you define Wendi? Would you define her as a narcissist, her as a sociopath, and then...
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say, just to play devil's advocate, right? And a normal anxiety response is that you become hyper self-aware, right? So any of us put in a situation where the words that we say can either convict us of murder or let us off, we're going to do that double guessing thing. And I completely agree with Karma that she's extremely eloquent. You kind of have to have a trained eye to do that. But I think in terms of what we can go on, I think it could go either way. Is this someone who feels they absolutely have something big to hide, or is this someone who's, as an attorney, as someone who's very self-aware, knows that her words matter and she feels anxious about it? So that self-awareness comes from that hyper self-awareness, rather.
So the person she was dating at the time, or up close to the time of this murder, is a guy named Jeffrey Lacoste, and he was interrogated as well. Any thoughts on his testimony? He was romantically tied to Wendi, and then they obviously had a falling out. But when he spoke to investigators, at least the first time, he basically said that she had almost like cast this spell over him. She had him under her thumb. What did you make of all that?
It was clearly someone who was besotted with her at some point, for sure. And then I think for me, what got me was just kind of the guys he spoke seemed like he couldn't believe he was in that situation, right? So when he describes what's going on and he's like, you might want to look at the brother, you might want to kind of look into this. It felt very much that there was an incongruence between, I think, the person he'd fallen in love with, or the version of that person, and the situation he found himself in. And don't forget, when we are in love, right? When we make up our minds about something, we do a lot of mental gymnastics not to change our view. If I decide I like you, it's, or I don't like you, it takes a lot to kind of convince me otherwise. Those kind of impressions run strong. And you could see that, as it progressed, the way that he described the relationship at the beginning and then the deterioration of which. So I felt it was a very powerful exchange, because you saw that evolution between this idolization of a woman and then coming to a realization that something really bad could have happened and that he could have been, ultimately blamed for it.
And what do you, I know you're kind of watching this from afar as we are, and you don't know the family, you don't know the Adelsons, you don't know the Markels, but from what you've read and what you've learned, what do you make of their family dynamic? And I'm talking about Harvey, Charlie, Wendi, Donna. Obviously, Charlie is sitting in jail and he's awaiting trial. But what do you make of the family dynamic?
It's interesting. I think especially the relationship between the son and the mother, right? So Donna and Charlie. When people talk about the Oedipal complex, people get really confused about what it is. Is it, a child that wants to kind of be with the mother? But actually, if you look at it from, and I'm not a Freudian, but I think there's something of value here. It usually is kind of a deal almost done between a parent and a child, where the parent wants to be kind of very much in control of the child. And as a consequence of that, the child is allowed to do whatever they want and they will not be punished for it. So that's kind of the deal the devil that's made with it, right? It's this kind of agreement between, I get to be in control of you, infantilize you, keep you for myself. And as payback, you get to, whatever, fill in the blank, stay a man-child, not grow up, act inappropriately. And for me, kind of, and again, this is looking at this from afar. I've never met these people. I have nothing to do with them, just a few things that I've seen. But there is this kind of almost validation that happens between the two. And you hear this in the calls as well, where they validate each other's worldview, which, is probably not the best thing to do as a parent. As a parent, part of what you should do is challenge your child's worldview, right? That's the way that we allow someone to become more resilient, to become accountable to their thinking. And it seems to be kind of reciprocated. And I think that was the big thing that stuck out for me.
Carm, a reaction to that? I see you thinking over there. I heard one word that jumped out at me. Can you guess what word that is?
Trying to keep control.
A single word that Dr. Linda used.
Which is?
Infantilized. Do you feel like you did that to me, Carm?
What do you mean, in the past? Or
In
the
general,
present?
both past and present. You think that's ever happened?
No, it's an ongoing thing.
Dr. Linda said something interesting. You're
Your mom is awesome.
Dr. Linda said something interesting. You are, and I'm going to carry this with me.
It's not about us. I love to talk about
It is about
myself.
us.
It's not
A story
about
is not
us.
interesting unless you make
You
it.
know, Linda, I said long time ago that the Adelsons are like us minus the murder. I am like Donna.
Dr. Linda, we don't have the
He's
healthy
like
stuff.
Charlie. And I have a daughter who is Wendi.
Dr. Linda, what do you? I wouldn't say. What do you charge for the hour?
No,
by
she's
the
not
way,
like. Yeah, we can do it over the phone.
by the way, big shout out to Steve Cohen for setting this up. The greatest booking producer in the world, greatest guy.
He's more than a booking producer.
Steve Cohen always has one sleeve rolled up. I asked him why. Dr. Linda, he says it's an anxiety thing. He rolls one sleeve up. I love it. I told him to get a tat sleeve on that arm.
I have a line for him.
What is the line?
The line is that I'm always working, at least half working.
Instead of high anxiety, he's got a high sleeve.
Anyway, we digress more than we talk about the topic. Don't worry, that's our style.
Dr. Linda, there was some interesting breaking news a week ago, and that is that next week, Katie Magbanua, who was convicted, there was a mistrial the first time around. She is the intermediary that helped set up the hitman with Charlie Adelson. She is going to speak to the state, to prosecutors, and offer some kind of information that could lead to a plea deal. She's facing life in prison right now, so there's all kinds of speculation as to what this might all be about. Forget that for a minute. If you are the Adelson family and you are alleged to have hired this woman to help get you the hitmen, what kind of anxiety level are you experiencing, and how does it manifest itself when you find out that a big person involved in this case is about to go speak, basically tell on you to the state? What does that do to your psyche?
I think this family must be living in a constant state of anxiety, right, from when this broke. I understand it's been 6 years now that this has been going on. Is that correct, more or less?
Well, the murder happened in 2014. Trials started a couple years after that, and the wheels of justice have been churning for quite some time. But I mean, just imagine for a second.
The first family member was arrested only in April.
Yeah, the first family member.
We used to use the term the low-hanging fruit, the hired killers.
The hired killers, correct. But the first family member, Charlie, was arrested in April of 2022. But assuming that they did this for a moment, and obviously you're innocent until proven guilty, at least in America, assuming for a minute that they did this, what kind of anxiety are you living in all these years, knowing that investigators, that the state is basically coming after you?
There's something in psychology called anticipatory anxiety. So it's the sense that I'm waiting for the anvil to fall on my head. So, it's almost as if every step you take, that could be the step that you step on the landmine. And when you have this kind of anticipatory anxiety, you inevitably become hyper aware, which we spoke about before. So who can I trust? Who can I trust? There's a sense of uncertainty. We know that living with uncertainty is horrible for people's well-being, which is why control is such a big thing for everyone, right? Nobody wants to live with uncertainty. I think we kind of delude ourselves about how much control we have generally in life in order to cope. Look at us. You're doing a whole podcast on this. I'm a million miles away. I've heard about this. Everyone's, there's almost this kind of sense that you're listening to it or being exposed to it from hundreds of thousands of different lenses. So there's very little respite. And when you get these kind of blips of like, okay, something new is going to come, it just puts a magnifying glass on all of it. So it'll be horrible, I suspect.
Carm, I just realized I've been living with anticipatory anxiety my whole life. Always.
Well, now he has a title.
But let me tell you something.
Doctor, name to it.
Getting back to what Dr. Linda said something, and then I want to move forward to what we're just talking about. But I thought it was really interesting. She said a healthy relationship for a parent is to challenge the child's worldview. Is that what you said, Dr. Linda?
Well, yeah, part of it, right? I think there's this notion that being a good parent is supporting your child at anything that they come up with. No, I mean, like sometimes you support your kids. Sometimes you tell your kid that's a really bad idea. So, you explain boundaries, you set up boundaries, you set up expectations. This is because the real world, also sets up boundaries and expectations. So if you don't allow your child to parent themselves, right? Because ultimately that's what you want to do. You want to get your child to a point where they internalize that voice that says, I want to eat a donut, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but actually I need to take care of my future self, right? If I'm always taking care of my present self, that never does. And initially a parent does that for you, but eventually, a good parent, teaches you how to do it for yourself. And I think therein lies the issue. If all you ever get is support because, I'm supporting you because that means you'll never leave me, which goes back to the idea of this kind of deal with the devil between mother and son that, potentially could have been set up.
Dr. Linda, for full disclosure, not only is my mother a licensed marriage therapist, my father is a retired psychiatrist. So everyone asks if I'm crazy, and the answer to that is definitely yes. And my dad always, for all the training my dad had, and he's an intellectual, and shout out to my dad who's struggling a little bit with an illness, but he'll be better. He always had funny little sayings, like he adopted the Nike slogan for me. He said, I don't care how you feel, just do it, he would say to me. And so, Carm, I adopted some just this week, as a matter of fact. You can ask my kids. I now tell my kids, treat this house like it's your house, because it is their house. They don't fully get it, but they better clean up. I'm tired of them acting out. So there are all sorts of dysfunctional families. Obviously, Carm and I have our own little dysfunction. But when do you go over the edge? I mean, we half jokingly say we're sort of like the Adelson family minus the murder. But what is it that would push a family to this point where they actually have the son-in-law, the ex-husband, the brother-in-law actually have him murdered? What pushes a family to that point?
I think one of the things that probably feeds into the potentiality of a family doing that is having a family where their notion of who they are, who they ought to be in the eyes of others becomes so agreed upon, embedded, built upon, that you begin to not only believe your own hype, but you begin to kind of feel that any threat to that at all should and can be dealt with in any way that's necessary. If there's no kind of regulation between, the different members of the family, if there's a sense that I need to be seen as this perfect family, which again, from what I've read, they seemed like an amazingly successful family, dentists and lawyers and doctors, and, it was all beautiful. If the image therefore becomes the thing that all of the identity is placed on, all of the self-worth individually and the family's worth is placed on, then any threat to that becomes something that is met with a huge amount of rage. You then add on potentially this idea that we're not regulating each other. So we're spitballing about how to deal with this. I'm guessing when your mom talk about how to deal with things, you regulate each other, which is why, you're like the Adelsons without the murder. If there was no regulation, you could be really upset and your mom would be like, oh, hold on, let me get the gun. Or would you rather a rope? Or would you, there needs to be that. But in this case, you could see it's kind of this amplification. There's no sense of sort of tethering to reality. It kind of goes off, and it almost feels, and as many times when you look at these kind of horrible situations, it's a kernel of a bad idea that almost runs away with itself because, nobody is taking responsibility individually. It's sort of almost the collectiveness of it feels like you're dividing up the responsibility. So is it really me, or is it me and you and Carm who are all deciding this? And actually, if it's all three of us, well, who's the one that's mostly responsible? So there's that kind of dilution of it as well. So, it needs to be a perfect storm, but perfect storms, of course, do happen.
No, the interesting thing is Wendy's behavior. She is always playing the expression?
Damsel in distress.
Damsel in distress.
See how well I know you, Carm? The
damsel in distress.
That's my wife's specialty. She even acronyms it to DID, my wife. Go ahead.
So Wendi will put out a victim signal to her mother Dana. I don't know if you saw any of the email or correspondence between the two.
Carmen, if I'm correct in this, you tend to think that Wendi was pulling the strings, sort of manipulating it through this damsel in distress character that she plays. Am I right?
Yes. I don't see she was the only one, but she certainly, maybe not consciously, but understood the family dynamics and played into those. That was part of the situation where she would rile up her mother and brother, who were her rescuers, and play the helpless little person, which she wasn't at all. And they would react to that and run to the rescue.
So, Dr. Linda, what do you think of that? The fact that Wendi was sort of the manipulator in charge here. Do you buy into Carm's theory?
Not that clearly, but yes, that's what I think.
Do you buy into that?
Look, I think there's definitely something to that. And I think that, again, if we look at the family dynamic, when we love our family members, we run and to support them. I think Carm raises an interesting point. She's the only girl in the family. There's, that kind of probably holds a special place. She lives far away, so that sense of vulnerability is there. So yeah, and again, I think that there's two sides to this. I think absolutely the vulnerability and her, whether she's playing the damsel in distress or whether I want to play the hero. I want to show you that I love you more than your husband and I can fix things still. I want to show you that, I'm your real family. There's a lot kind of to benefit both sides here in terms of doing that. So, and again, we don't know what happened with this family, but you see it in families played out time and time again, right? So when you look at sort of systemic therapy and systems theory with family therapy, you tend to find that when one person is presenting as particularly vulnerable or weak, it's almost as if to keep the balance, the others need to take control. And I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what you're referring to, Carmen. I think you're spot on.
And Dr. Linda, in my family, you've got me.
But it's boring to talk
the black
that.
sheep. And then you've got, no, I think it's interesting, Carm, because you tie everything back. You look through a mirror at a lot of things.
Your own experience.
Now, then you've got my sister, who is the saint of the family. She went to medical school, graduated in college and medical school in 6 years, never had a sip of alcohol, straight as can be.
Wine.
She's a sweetheart. She's a sweetheart. In the Adelson family, you've got Rob Adelson. He is sort of the outlier. He disassociated himself from the family. Basically said, I want no part of this family. He's a physician. He lives, I believe, in Albany, New York, if I'm correct.
But your sister didn't dissociate from the family.
I'm saying if we were the Adelsons, she would be the Rob Adelson of our family. She would, because we are all slightly dysfunctional, and she would not be a part of that. But what do you make of that you've got this sort of one outlier in the family that recognized all this dysfunction and said, hey, I'm out of here? What do you make of that?
I thought that was actually really fascinating and perhaps, potentially telling, right? The idea that, again, in family therapy, you talk about the symptomological one. In a dysfunctional family, the symptomological one is the highly functioning one, which is what the case was here.
I want to read a quick quote and then get your take on something sort of related, sort of different. But Jason Solomon, shout out to Jason, he started the group Justice for Dan Markel. He's an attorney. And in a blog he wrote about the Adelson family, it's not just about motive, but about being narcissists, having a sense of entitlement, feeling they need to get it their way. Is that accurate? I mean, we talked about narcissism off the top, but do you think that this quote is accurate, Dr. Linda?
Very much so. Very much so. That the world owes me, the world, needs to see me. Things need to go my way. My feelings are more important than anyone else's.
Did you hear this?
Yeah, I did hear it, Carm.
Good.
Did you hear the part about the infantilizing, Carm?
Yes, I heard that.
It goes both ways here, Carm. So, Linda, we had a fascinating show a couple weeks ago. We had 3 ex-cons on, and these were like serious ex-cons. One was in for murder. He got out on a technicality. He was actually like the sweetest of the bunch. He's the one guy you didn't think was the murderer, but he was sweet, soft-spoken, kind of small guy. The real tough guys were committed lesser crimes. But They had a very interesting take. They've I think collectively served something like 90 years together. But they said that, look, they come from the street, they were in gangs, and they live by a code. But they say that they think that Charlie Adelson is not made of the same fabric, that he is basically a mama's boy. He's going to cave under the pressure of these jail cells, the walls of the jail cells closing in on him. So that leads to a question. Do you think that the pressure will become too much for him? Is there a chance, because there's been a lot of talk, that he flips on the family, do you think?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Look, I think it very much depends on how invested he still feels in the family and how invested the family still feel in him, right? One of the clips that I took a look at was when he was very much complaining about his sister, right? So she does this and she gets everything, and so for me, that's the fragile point, right? Who am I doing this for? Am I doing it for a family I bought into, a mother I respect, or am I doing this for a sister who, to your point, was held up, perhaps more as a golden child, maybe not as much as the other brother, but still, a golden child, a vulnerable one. What's in it for me? And I think that's going to be the tipping point.
And that's a great point. That was a conversation that Charlie had with Donna, and basically said, look, Mom, I worked. I had to get out loans to become this dentist, to make all this money. She's basically a trust fund kid. So you can, like you just suggested, Dr. Linda, it's kind of peering into the psychology of how he thinks of his sister. And there seems to be a little resentment there, right?
It sounds like it, right? It sounds like it. And I think it's something that perhaps the mom is aware of, because she's very much trying to kind of, pacify him when he's saying that, and like, yeah, I know, and you did amazing. Yes, you did work really. It's a fascinating exchange.
It's a wild story, Carm. Just as I'm sitting here asking these questions, I'm thinking, I'm so glad I'm not an Adelson. I have so much to worry about. If investigators, if the long arm of the law was coming after me, not a place I want to be. I'll take my anxiety any day over what they're dealing with, although they deserve it. So Charlie's MO, Dr. Linda, he's got this license plate on his Ferrari. It says the Maestro, done steroids, allegedly. He's a womanizer. He's had these apparent sex trips to the Philippines and Thailand. He's apparently involved in some sort of insider trading. He's got this dynamic with his mother. I can't really comment on that. What is behind all of this? What's behind all of it?
Remember, we spoke about kind of antisocial behavior, right? So what you tend to see is people don't wake up and do horrible things usually overnight. You see a slow disregard for social norms and for rules and for bending them and for breaking them. So I think one of the things that it speaks to is this idea that, there are rules. They kind of apply to other people, maybe not to me in the same way. And that in and of itself is something that's going to be interesting to see how this therefore plays out, where he is incarcerated. Rules are very different there. It's there's people that are way better than him at breaking rules and bending the rules.
Somebody said that he would do dentistry in the prison.
Maybe.
You never know. So obviously a big piece of this puzzle is the other side of the family, the Markels. They're really the victims in this. You've got two sons that were caught up in all this. What are your thoughts on what Ruth and Phil Markel and the daughter Shelley Markel, what kind of damage does this do to their family? They've been dealing with these constant legal battles. We've had Ruth Markel, the mother, on the show multiple times, and she talks about the anxiety and the stress of these trials. So what does it do to the other family, to the victim family?
It must be absolutely horrific for them. And again, that kind of this idea that they weren't allowed to immediately spend time and see their grandkids, and that to have lost a child and then lose any connection or have the fear of losing a connection to that child's children. And then on top of that, again, speaking of anticipatory anxiety, right? So there's a sense of what is going to happen next? Is there going to be accountability? When people speak, that word that's overused, closure. Well, what is closure really? It's about accountability. It's about how, what is the story? What does it look like? And the story, to your point, we're here 8 years later. still being told, you're still saying there's breaking news about this, things are happening. Imagine living with that day in, day out, trying to kind of, on top of everything else, deal with the grief and the loss of a child in such horrific circumstances, especially when it comes to violent loss. It has to do with families. There's a sense of, should I have seen something? Could I have seen something? Which, of course, is impossible, but it doesn't stop people from having that burden as well. So it just, my heart goes out to that family. It must be absolutely horrific.
You know that Ruth Markel, the mother, wrote a book that came out recently called Unveiling.
The Unveiling.
And she mentioned in there that she had heart problems, medically speaking, not just emotionally.
So these mental issues that you're dealing with can manifest themselves in physical ways, right, Dr. Linda?
100%. Our thoughts are not intangible things. They affect our biochemistry. They affect our hormones. If you're constantly thinking negative thoughts, your body's not only just going to be full of cortisol, you're going to have a huge impact on your gastric system, on everything, on your heart, absolutely on, and then also on your decision making and your life choices and your health choices. This is enormous. This is enormous it's heartbreaking.
Carmen, it's a miracle I'm still in one piece with all that cortisol,
very
cortisol flowing through.
Very lucky. We are very lucky.
Dr. Linda said something interesting. She used the word closure. And a couple of weeks ago on our very own podcast, Dr. Linda, we had Ruth Markel. And by the way, Carm, it is not the unveiling. It is the unveiling. That is not it's not a silent V. We give you a little slack for your accent, but it's the
darling.
It is the unveiling. And along with Ruth Markel, we had the founder of MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Candace Leitner, who is a very well-known grassroots activist. She said that there is no such thing. She took issue with the word closure because her daughter was murdered by a drunk driver in 1980, and she says she will never get over it. So to some degree, there is no such thing as closure. Is that right?
I do think closure is the right word perhaps to use with grief. I think in my experience, loss means that you're constantly adapting to a changing pain, right? So it's different versions of that pain. And I can imagine that when there's this huge amount of injustice associated, like you're saying with the Mother Against Drunk Drivers founder, or in a violent attack, then closure must sound like you've given up or you're okay with it. And absolutely, I'm sure no one wants to kind of send that message. I think for me, the point is about an acknowledgement and understanding of what happened when there's that much uncertainty. And I think that's the hard thing that this family is dealing with.
This did not happen during your show, but Polka Dots writes, Carm, never admit to nodding off during the show. You were just thinking really hard, Carm. Even when you... Dr. Linda, she nodded off during a recent episode. I had a poker in the belly.
We had 70 episodes, so it
70. We're close to 80-something.
80-something episodes. Anyway,
70,
I
80,
nodded off. I admit it, and I am entitled to
I
it.
poked her, and she immediately launched into a question. It was the most miraculous thing.
There you go.
And it was a very coherent question. All right, we're flying along here. This one is from Nietzsche's Muse. What I find unbelievable about this is how can a mom kill the child of another mother, especially if he's the father of your children? The Adelsons lack empathy and vision. I hope they all get convicted.
Look, I think when your hate for someone else outweighs, your concern for other people, right? So the hate of your partner or of your, son-in-law or whoever, right, is seen as a way of helping those kids. And that's how it would have been distorted in their minds, right? It wouldn't have been, you're taking these children away from someone who adores them, their father, a significant figure. In order to justify it, speaking about the mental gymnastics we were speaking about before, you're like, well, no, they'd actually be much better off because look, this man, and apparently it was said that he was bad-mouthing the grandmother. Like this, that's an awful thing to do, to bad-mouth the grandmother. So, maybe they are better off. So people are great at justifying their actions and finding rationalizations, unfortunately.
And a quick last comment from JPJ, and trust me, we got plenty of hate mail in recent episodes. This one reads, what a great show, Joel and Carm. Oh, excuse me, Carm and Joel. put you first, ladies first. I just finished Ruth's book yesterday, The Unveiling. What an amazing family the Markels are, really a class act in every way. I lost 2 family members, my older brother and father, and 2 dear close friends in the span of just 3 years. I can tell you firsthand from experience that trauma will absolutely change your point of view. I no longer sweat the small stuff, and I just go with the flow. Whatever happens in the day-to-day, I always think to myself, it could be worse. I love Ruth's quote, don't get lost in the loss. That's what Ruth Markel says. Don't get lost in the loss. So very last, on an uplifting note, Dr. Linda, with all this tragedy, with all this horrific violence, there can be a silver lining that comes out of it in some small way. Is that right?
Look, I think that's the thing with life. It's a cliche because it's true. We can't control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond to it rather than reacting. And I think that's the thing. If we spent more time responding to life rather than reacting to life, then we'd be, held in much better stead. So yeah, absolutely beautiful, positive last note to end on, and, wishing the best for anyone out there. That was a really powerful last statement that you read. I'm so sorry that your listener went through that, but beautiful to hear that it's allowed a perspective that means, we're all on this floating rock going through space, and, sweating the small stuff really isn't worth it.
And Dr. Linda, beautiful to have you on. Thank you so much for doing this. Sorry about the hecticness of the day.
So much.
What can we plug for you for our global audience, not our American, a website, a book, anything going on?
My last book's called Unfollow. It's on drlinda.com. You can take a look at that. And on Netflix, I'm on Autopsy and Breakup of the Bands. So those are the current projects.
Is it on Amazon?
It's on Amazon, yeah.
Do you see patients privately, Dr. Linda?
I still have a small private practice, absolutely.
I'll have to talk to Steve Cohen to see if he can help me out. I might have to squeeze myself in there, figure out this issue with Carm once and for all. But thank you so much. Absolute pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Such a pleasure
Okay.
seeing you both.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thanks a lot.
Love
for
you,
your time
America.
and for your patience.